Marcus Chen had always joked that his luck was worse than a broken hyperdrive. But crashing on an ice planet during the worst blizzard in recorded history seemed excessive even for him. The cargo hauler's engines had failed 3 hours into what should have been a routine supply run to the mining colonies. Now he lay pinned beneath twisted metal wreckage. His left leg crushed and his ribs screaming with every breath. The emergency beacon blinked weakly in the snow beside him, its red light barely visible through the howling white curtain that surrounded the crash site. Marcus knew no rescue ship could navigate through this storm. The weather satellites had been tracking this tempest for weeks. It was a monster that would rage for days, maybe longer. Blood seeped through his thermal suit, mixing with the snow beneath him. His medical scanner showed internal bleeding and a fractured femur. Without immediate treatment, he had maybe 6 hours before shock would claim him. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd survived 3 tours fighting the Zelani Empire, only to die alone on a frozen rock because of a faulty fuel injector. That's when he saw the eyes. Golden, intelligent, and far too large to belong to any creature that should exist on this barren world. They watched him from behind a wall of swirling snow. Unblinking and curious, Marcus reached for his sidearm with trembling fingers, but the weight pinning his arm made movement impossible. The eyes moved closer, and gradually a shape emerged from the storm. It was impossible. Dragons were myths. Stories told by spacers who'd spent too long in hyperspace. Yet here one stood before him, no larger than a house cat but unmistakably reptilian. Crystalline scales caught what little light filtered through the storm, creating rainbow patterns across its hide. Steam rose from its nostrils in the frigid air, and small flames flickered between its teeth. The dragon hatchling approached cautiously, its head tilted as it studied the strange creature trapped beneath the metal. It had never seen anything like this human before. The scent was wrong, not prey, not predator, but something else entirely. Something that smelled of metal and fire and distant stars. Marcus tried to speak but only managed a weak cough. The hatchling stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from its small body. It sniffed at his wounds, its expression almost thoughtful. Then it did something that defied all logic and reason. It began to dig. With claws designed for breaking through ice and stone, the young dragon worked at the debris, pinning Marcus down. Each piece of twisted metal was carefully moved aside, the creature's movements deliberate and purposeful. Steam rose from where its breath melted the snow around them, creating a small pocket of warmth in the endless cold. As feeling returned to his arms, Marcus managed to activate his suit's emergency medical system. Synthetic blood began flowing into his system, while nanobots worked to stabilize his internal injuries. It wouldn't save him, but it might buy him a few more hours. The dragon paused in its work, watching the small lights on his suit with fascination. "Smart little thing, aren't you?" Marcus whispered through chattering teeth. The dragon's ears perked up at his voice, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was intelligence there, a spark of understanding that sent chills down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The hatchling resumed its digging with renewed urgency, as if it understood that time was running short. Marcus couldn't understand why this creature was helping him, but he wasn't about to question a miracle. The storm continued to rage around them, but within their small bubble of warmth, an unlikely partnership was forming. When the last piece of debris was finally cleared, Marcus tried to stand and immediately collapsed. His broken leg wouldn't support his weight, and the nanobots could only do so much for the damage. The dragon moved to his side, pressing its warm body against him. The message was clear. It wasn't going to leave him here to die, but where could they go? The nearest settlement was hundreds of miles away, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Marcus looked into those golden eyes again and saw something that made his breath catch. The dragon wasn't just helping him randomly. It had a destination in mind, and somehow, Marcus knew that his survival depended on trusting this impossible creature. The hatchling moved to his injured leg and began breathing gentle flames over the makeshift splint his medical system had created. The warmth penetrated deep into his bones, easing the pain and improving circulation. It was treating him with the same care he might show to an injured comrade, and the realization left him speechless. As the storm reached its peak fury, the dragon curled up beside Marcus, sharing its warmth through the long, dark hours ahead. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that would test the limits of both their endurance. Tonight they simply held on to life together, two unlikely survivors in a world that seemed determined to kill them both. Dawn brought no relief from the storm, only a slight lessening of the wind's fury that made travel barely possible. Marcus had spent the night drifting in and out of consciousness, kept alive by the dragon's warmth and his suit's life support systems. The nanobots had done their work, sealing the worst of his internal injuries, but he remained critically weak. The hatchling had not slept. It had spent the night watching the horizon, occasionally stepping out into the storm before returning to Marcus's side. Its behavior suggested urgency, as if something drove it forward that it couldn't ignore. When morning came, it began nudging Marcus insistently, small puffs of warm breath against his face telling him it was time to move. "I can't walk," Marcus told the creature, knowing it couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey the message. His broken leg was a mass of swollen tissue beneath the medical splint, and every attempt to put weight on it sent lightning bolts of agony through his nervous system. The dragon seemed to consider this problem for a moment, then began dragging pieces of wreckage toward him. With surprising intelligence, it arranged the metal fragments into a crude sled, using strips of torn fabric from Marcus's emergency kit to lash them together. The makeshift stretcher wouldn't win any design awards, but it would allow him to be pulled across the snow. Getting Marcus onto the sled proved to be an exercise in mutual determination. The dragon was strong for its size, but Marcus still weighed nearly 200 pounds in his survival gear. They worked together, the human using his remaining strength to lift himself while the dragon pushed and pulled from below. By the time they finished, both were exhausted, but Marcus was secure on his improvised transport. The journey began slowly. The dragon wrapped the sled's towing straps around its body and began pulling, its claws finding purchase on the ice beneath the snow. Each step was deliberate, testing the ground ahead for hidden crevasses or unstable ice. Marcus tried to help by using his hands to push against the ground, but his strength was failing rapidly. As they traveled, Marcus began to notice details about his rescuer that defied everything he thought he knew about dragons. Its scales weren't just decorative. They seemed to regulate temperature, shifting from deep blue in the cold to warm gold when it exerted itself. Steam rose constantly from its nostrils, creating a small cloud that helped navigate through the blinding snow. Most remarkably, it seemed to know exactly where they were going. The terrain was treacherous. Ice bridges spanned deep chasms where the planet's thermal vents had carved channels through the frozen surface. The dragon navigated these hazards with instinctive skill, testing each crossing before committing to it. Twice they had to backtrack when the ice proved too thin to support their combined weight. Marcus's suit reported his condition was deteriorating. The nanobots were running low on raw materials, and his blood pressure was dropping despite the synthetic plasma they'd manufactured. He estimated he had perhaps 12 hours before his body would shut down completely. The dragon seemed to sense his weakening state and increased their pace. During their brief rest stops, Marcus found himself studying his unlikely savior. The creature was clearly young, probably recently hatched based on its size and the soft quality of its scales. Yet it displayed wisdom beyond its apparent age, making decisions about their route that showed deep understanding of the terrain. How did something so small survive alone in this wasteland? The answer came when they crested a small ridge, and Marcus saw the landscape spread out before them. In the distance, barely visible through the storm, were the remains of what had once been massive creatures. Dragon bones, some as large as spacecraft, protruded from the ice like the ribs of ancient leviathans. This had once been a nesting ground, a place where dragons came to reproduce and raise their young. Now it was a graveyard. The hatchling paused at the sight, a keening cry escaping its throat that was barely audible over the wind. Marcus felt his heart clench as he realized the full tragedy of the situation. This young dragon was likely the last of its kind on this world, and it was risking everything to reach whatever lay ahead. They descended into the bone field carefully. The dragon's demeanor changed as they moved among the ancient remains, becoming more cautious and reverent. Some of the larger skeletons still bore scraps of scales that caught the light like jewels scattered across the ice. Marcus could only imagine the majesty these creatures must have possessed in life. Halfway through the graveyard, the dragon stopped suddenly. It had been pulling steadily for hours, but now it stood frozen, its head raised to test the wind. Marcus strained to hear what had caught its attention, but the storm masked all other sounds. Then he felt it through the ground, a rhythmic vibration, like something massive breathing far below the ice. The hatchling began pulling with renewed urgency, no longer testing each step, but moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. Whatever lay ahead was calling to it, and Marcus realized they were racing against more than just time and weather. They were racing towards something that might be their salvation or their doom. As they left the bone field behind, Marcus caught glimpses of structures beneath the ice, vast shapes that might once have been buildings or nests. The dragon's destination was becoming clearer, and with that clarity came a growing sense of awe and terror. They weren't just seeking shelter from the storm, they were going home. The entrance was almost invisible, a crack in the ice wall that seemed too narrow for anything larger than the hatchling itself. But as they approached, Marcus realized the dragon knew exactly what it was doing. The creature began breathing flames at the ice, its internal heat far more powerful than he'd imagined. The frozen barrier melted away like butter under a blowtorch, revealing a tunnel that descended into the planet's core. Warmth flowed up from the depths, carrying with it scents that spoke of life and age and power. Marcus's environmental sensors detected elevated temperatures and unusual atmospheric readings. Whatever lay below had been here for a very long time, sustained by geothermal energy that turned this frozen wasteland into something approaching paradise. The descent was treacherous. The dragon had to partially melt their way down, creating enough space for the sled to follow. Marcus marveled at the creature's control over its flames. Never too hot to destabilize the tunnel, never too cool to be effective. It was engineering on an instinctive level that put his own technical training to shame. As they went deeper, the walls began to change. What had started as rough ice gave way to something that looked almost manufactured. The surfaces were too smooth to be natural, carved with patterns that seemed to tell stories in a language Marcus couldn't begin to comprehend. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls at regular intervals, glowing with their own internal light and casting rainbow patterns through the tunnel. The dragon's excitement was palpable. Its movements became more animated, and it began making soft chirping sounds that echoed through the passages. This wasn't just shelter they were seeking. This was sacred ground. Marcus began to understand that he wasn't just being rescued. He was being brought to witness something extraordinary. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The space was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow despite the gentle glow emanating from thousands of crystal formations. But it wasn't the size that stunned him. It was the occupant. At the center of the chamber, partially encased in ice, lay a dragon of impossible proportions. Her body stretched for hundreds of meters, scales the size of Marcus's entire sled covering her hide. Even in apparent death or dormancy, she radiated power that made the air itself seem to thrum with energy. This was what the hatchling had been seeking, its mother. The small dragon rushed forward, abandoning the sled to approach the massive form. It began making sounds Marcus had never heard before, complex vocalizations that seemed part song, part language, part desperate plea. The mother dragon's eyes remained closed, but Marcus's instruments detected something his mind struggled to process. A heartbeat. Slow, perhaps one beat every few minutes, but steady and strong. She wasn't dead. She was hibernating. The hatchling climbed onto its mother's massive head, pressing its small body against scales that dwarfed it completely. The sounds it made became more urgent, more desperate. It was trying to wake her, and Marcus realized why. The young dragon couldn't survive alone in the wasteland above. It needed its mother, but something was preventing her from awakening. Marcus forced himself off the sled, using his remaining strength to approach the ancient creature. His medical scanner went wild as he drew closer, detecting biological processes unlike anything in the galactic databases. The dragon's body was operating at a metabolic level so low it was barely detectable, yet somehow maintaining perfect biological integrity. Then he saw the problem. Embedded in the ice around the mother dragon were metallic objects, weapons, fragments of what looked like military hardware. Someone had attacked her and she'd retreated here to heal. But the foreign materials in the ice were interfering with her natural recovery process, keeping her trapped in this state between life and death. The hatchling noticed Marcus examining the debris and became extremely agitated. It pulled at one of the metal fragments with its claws, but the object was frozen solid. Then it looked at Marcus with an expression that was unmistakably hopeful. It had brought him here not just to save his life, but because it somehow understood that he might be able to help. Marcus activated his suit's toolkit, pulling out a plasma cutter designed for emergency repairs. The device was meant for working on spacecraft hull materials, but it might be powerful enough to free the trapped objects. He looked into the hatchling's golden eyes and nodded. Working methodically, Marcus began cutting away the ice around each piece of debris. The hatchling helped by breathing precise flames to soften the ice ahead of his cuts. They worked as a team, the human's technical knowledge, combining with the dragon's natural abilities to slowly free each foreign object from its frozen prison. Some of the weapons were clearly of human manufacture, missiles and projectile rounds from a military engagement that must have taken place decades ago. Others bore the distinctive energy signatures of Zilani Empire technology. Marcus realized he was looking at the aftermath of a battle that had been fought when the first colonial expeditions reached this system. As each piece of debris was removed, changes became visible in the mother dragon. Her breathing deepened and color began returning to her massive scales. The temperature in the chamber rose noticeably, and the crystal formations began glowing brighter. The hatchling became increasingly excited, chirping and clicking in what was obviously joyful celebration. But Marcus was running out of time. His suit's medical systems were failing, and he could feel his strength ebbing with each passing moment. There were still several large pieces embedded deeper in the ice, and he wasn't sure he had enough energy left to free them all. The nanobots had done all they could, and his body was beginning the final stages of shutdown. The hatchling seemed to sense his condition and positioned itself beside him, sharing its warmth as it had during the storm. But warmth alone wouldn't be enough this time. Marcus needed medical attention that no dragon, however magical, could provide. That's when the mother dragon's eyes opened. The ancient dragon's eyes were like looking into twin suns. Golden light filled the chamber as consciousness returned to the massive creature, and Marcus felt the weight of intelligence beyond human comprehension studying him. The mother dragon's gaze moved from her offspring to the human who had helped free her, and in that moment, understanding passed between species separated by evolution and stars. The hatchling pressed itself against its mother's great snout, making soft sounds of relief and joy. The ancient dragon responded with a deep rumble that Marcus felt through his bones rather than heard. Her massive head lifted slowly, ice crystals falling like rain from scales that had been frozen for decades. Steam rose from her body as her metabolism accelerated, and the temperature in the chamber climbed steadily. Marcus collapsed as his legs finally gave out. The plasma cutter fell from nerveless fingers, its power cell drained from hours of continuous use. His vision was tunneling, and his suit's alarms were screaming warnings he no longer had the strength to acknowledge. The nanobots had exhausted their resources, and his body was shutting down system by system. The mother dragon lowered her great head until it was level with Marcus, studying him with those blazing golden eyes. Her breath washed over him, carrying scents of flame and age and something indefinable that spoke of power older than human civilization. For a moment, Marcus thought this might be how his story ended, examined by a creature of legend as his life slipped away. Instead, the dragon did something impossible. She began to sing. The sound wasn't audible in any traditional sense. It was felt, a vibration that resonated through Marcus's bones and into his very cells. His suit's sensors couldn't measure it, couldn't classify it, couldn't even detect it. But his body responded immediately. The pain in his broken leg lessened and his breathing became easier. The internal bleeding that had been slowly killing him began to slow. The hatchling joined its mother's song, its smaller voice weaving through the ancient melody like a harmony written in starlight. Together they created something that was part music, part medicine, part miracle. Marcus's medical scanner showed readings that defied explanation. Cellular regeneration at impossible rates, bone density increasing, neural activity stabilizing. But it was more than healing. As the dragon song continued, Marcus began to see images in his mind, visions of this world as it once was, when dragons soared through skies filled with floating cities and crystal spires reached toward the stars. He saw the arrival of the first human exploration ships, the cautious attempts at communication, the gradual building of trust between species. Then came the war. The Zilani Empire's expansion had reached this system, and they saw the dragons as obstacles to be eliminated rather than beings to be negotiated with. The images showed massive battles in space and on the planet's surface, human and dragon fighting side by side against the crystalline warships of the Empire. It was a war that had lasted for years, devastating both civilizations. The mother dragon had been among the last defenders, using her incredible power to shield the evacuation of both human colonies and dragon nests. But the effort had cost her everything. Mortally wounded by Zilani energy weapons, she'd retreated to this chamber to heal, intending to emerge when her strength returned. Instead, the foreign materials in her wounds had trapped her in suspended animation for nearly 30 years. The vision showed her offspring's desperate struggle to survive alone on the surface, the last of its kind in a world that had become a frozen tomb. It had watched the ice storms grow stronger each year, as the planet's climate systems failed without dragonfire to maintain them. The arrival of Marcus's ship had been the first sign of intelligent life it had encountered since its mother's fall. As understanding flooded through him, Marcus realized the true scope of what was happening. The hatchling hadn't just saved his life out of kindness. It had recognized him as one of the humans its mother had fought alongside. In helping to free the ancient dragon, Marcus had completed a circle that had been broken for 3 decades. The healing song reached a crescendo, and Marcus felt strength flowing back into his body. His broken bones knitted together with audible cracks and his internal injuries sealed completely. The nanobots in his system, suddenly provided with raw materials they couldn't identify, began working with efficiency that exceeded their programming. His suit's medical displays showed vitals returning to normal ranges for the first time since the crash. When the song ended, Marcus sat up easily for the first time in days. His leg, which had been a mass of shattered bone and torn tissue, now supported his weight without pain. He looked down at himself in amazement, then up at the 2 dragons who had saved him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The mother dragon regarded him with something that might have been amusement in those ancient eyes. She lifted one massive claw and gently touched his chest, directly over his heart. For a moment, warmth spread through his entire body, and Marcus had the distinct impression that she was marking him somehow, claiming him as pack, as family, as something precious to be protected. The hatchling bounced excitedly around them both, clearly overjoyed to have its mother awake and its human friend healed. It had succeeded in its impossible mission, bringing together the 2 beings it needed most. But Marcus realized their adventure was far from over. The storm above was still raging, and according to his suit's chronometer, they'd been underground for nearly 18 hours. His rescue beacon was still broadcasting, but no ship could reach them in current conditions. More importantly, he now understood that these dragons weren't just survivors of an ancient war. They were the key to this world's future. The mother dragon rose to her full height, her massive bulk dwarfing everything around her. Ice fell away in sheets as she stretched muscles that hadn't moved in decades. Her presence filled the chamber with power and purpose, and Marcus knew that their journey together was just beginning. She looked toward the tunnel they'd used to enter, then back at Marcus. The message was clear: it was time to return to the surface. But this time, they wouldn't be fleeing the storm. They would be bringing the power to end it. The human fleet arrived like cavalry from ancient Earth legends, their ships cutting through the clearing skies with precision that spoke of experienced military coordination. Marcus activated his suit's identification beacon, broadcasting his credentials as a registered civilian contractor. He needed the incoming ships to understand that the dragons weren't attacking him. They were protecting him. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice crackled through his communicator, the static-filled transmission carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "This is Admiral Chen of the Colonial Defense Force. Marcus Chen, respond if you're receiving this transmission." "Admiral Chen, this is Marcus. I'm alive and uninjured, but the situation is more complex than you know." Marcus looked up at the mother dragon, who was watching the approaching human ships with obvious interest rather than hostility. "The dragons are allies. They're fighting the Zilani, not us." There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. "Marcus, did you just say dragons? As in actual dragons?" "Affirmative, Admiral. And I think you should know. One of them is your nephew." The revelation that the rescue fleet was commanded by his own aunt added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Admiral Chen had spent her career fighting to protect human colonies from alien threats. Learning that her nephew was not only alive but allied with mythical creatures would challenge everything she thought she knew about this conflict. Above them, the battle between dragons and Zilani ships had reached a stalemate. The dragon's firestorm continued to protect the surface from orbital bombardment, but the Empire's ships had pulled back to higher orbit and were preparing for a sustained siege. The arrival of the human fleet changed the tactical picture completely. The mother dragon made a decision that would echo through history. She launched herself into the air with powerful wing beats that created downdrafts strong enough to knock Marcus flat. But instead of joining the aerial battle, she flew directly toward the human flagship. The massive creature positioned herself between the two fleets, her presence impossible to ignore or misinterpret. Marcus activated his suit's broadcast system, transmitting on all frequencies. "Admiral Chen, the dragon approaching your ship is not hostile. She's trying to communicate. I need you to trust me on this. Marcus, I have a creature the size of a battleship heading straight for my command ship. You'll understand if I'm feeling a bit nervous. She won't hurt you. These dragons fought alongside humans against the Zilani 30 years ago. They're the reason any human colonies survived in this system at all." The mother dragon settled onto the hull of the Admiral's flagship with delicate precision, her claws finding purchase on the reinforced armor without causing damage. Her great head moved close to the bridge viewports, and through his suit's link to the fleet communications, Marcus could hear the gasps of amazement from the bridge crew. Then something extraordinary happened. The dragon began to project images directly into the ship's communication systems, her consciousness somehow interfacing with human technology in ways that defied understanding. The bridge crew found themselves witnessing the same visions Marcus had experienced: the history of cooperation between dragons and humans, the devastating war against the Zilani Empire, and the sacrifice that had led to 3 decades of hibernation. Admiral Chen's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke again. "My God, Marcus, are you seeing this? I lived it, Admiral. This dragon healed me, saved my life, and brought me to understand what we lost when the war ended. But it's not too late to rebuild that alliance." The Zilani fleet commander apparently decided that negotiation was not an option. Energy beams lanced down from the Empire ships, targeting both the human fleet and the dragon perched on the flagship. The response was immediate and devastating. Every dragon in the sky converged on the Zilani position simultaneously, but they weren't just attacking. They were demonstrating tactical coordination with the human ships. Dragons provided cover for human fighters while human vessels used their shields to protect dragons during attack runs. It was a dance of war that neither species could perform alone. Marcus watched from the surface as his aunt's fleet and their unlikely allies systematically dismantled the Zilani force. The Empire's ships, designed to fight conventional opponents, couldn't adapt to the fluid tactics of creatures that could change direction instantly and breathe weapons no technology could replicate. The hatchling beside him was chirping excitedly, its sounds forming patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as actual language. The young dragon was providing commentary on the battle, describing strategies and celebrating successful maneuvers with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator. When the last Zilani ship fled the system, trailing atmosphere and debris, a profound silence settled over the battlefield. The dragons and human ships remained in formation, neither side certain what came next. 30 years of separation couldn't be healed instantly, but the foundation for renewal had been laid. The mother dragon returned from the flagship and settled beside Marcus, her massive form blocking the wind as smaller dragons began landing around them. The surface of the planet was transforming visibly as their combined presence continued to affect the climate systems. Ice was melting, revealing patches of ground that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Admiral Chen's shuttlecraft touched down nearby, and Marcus watched his aunt emerge wearing full environmental gear and an expression of wonder he'd never seen on her face. She approached the mother dragon slowly, her hands visible and empty, a gesture of peaceful intent that the ancient creature seemed to understand. "Marcus," the Admiral said, never taking her eyes off the dragon, "I think we need to have a very long conversation about what happened here." "Yes, ma'am. But first I think someone else wants to meet you." The hatchling stepped forward, its golden eyes bright with curiosity as it studied this new human. It chirped once, a sound that somehow conveyed both greeting and question. Admiral Chen knelt down, bringing herself to the young dragon's eye level. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "Thank you for saving my nephew." The hatchling touched her outstretched hand with one small claw, and Marcus could see understanding pass between them. The alliance between humans and dragons hadn't been lost after all, It had just been waiting for the right moment to be reborn. But as the celebration continued around them, Marcus noticed something troubling on his suit's long-range sensors. More Zilani ships were approaching the system, and this time they weren't coming alone. The Empire had allies now, species that shared their hatred of human-dragon cooperation. The real war was just beginning. The ascent from the underground chamber was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The mother dragon moved with fluid grace despite her massive size, her body generating enough heat to melt a pathway twice as wide as their original tunnel. The ice didn't just melt, it vaporized, creating a cloud of superheated steam that rose ahead of them like a beacon piercing the storm above. Marcus rode on the great dragon's back between two towering spinal ridges. The hatchling nestled beside him. His position gave him a perfect view of the power being unleashed around them. The mother dragon's scales had begun glowing with internal fire, and each breath she released sent waves of heat rolling through the expanding tunnel. The very rocks beneath the ice began to glow cherry red as they passed. When they emerged onto the planet's surface, the storm's fury seemed to pause. Wind that had been howling with the force of a hurricane suddenly stilled, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The mother dragon stood at the tunnel's mouth, her massive form silhouetted against the swirling snow, and released a roar that shook the ground for miles around. The sound carried frequencies that Marcus's instruments couldn't measure, harmonics that seemed to resonate with the planet's core itself. Around them, the ice began to crack and shift. Steam vents that had been dormant for decades suddenly erupted with gouts of superheated vapor. The frozen landscape was awakening, responding to the presence of its guardian after 30 years of slumber. Marcus activated his communicator, hoping to reach any rescue ships that might be monitoring the emergency frequencies. Instead, he received a transmission that made his blood run cold. The signal was being broadcast on military channels, and the voice was speaking in the harsh, crystalline tones of the Zilani Empire. Imperial Survey Vessel Shard of Winter to surface teams. Dragon energy signatures detected in Grid 77 Alpha. Prepare bombardment solutions. The Xeno threat will be eliminated before it can fully manifest. The Zilani were here. Somehow, the Empire had detected the Mother Dragon's awakening and dispatched ships to finish what they'd started 3 decades ago. Marcus's rescue beacon hadn't just been calling for help. It had been broadcasting his location to anyone monitoring emergency frequencies, including the enemies of everything he was trying to protect. The mother dragon sensed the threat immediately. Her great head swung toward the sky, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. The hatchling pressed closer to Marcus, its earlier joy replaced by obvious fear. High above them, barely visible through the storm clouds, shapes moved against the gray sky. Zilani warships, their crystalline hulls gleaming like ice as they descended toward the surface. Marcus grabbed his emergency kit and activated every defensive system his suit possessed. It wasn't much. Personal shields designed to protect against environmental hazards, not military-grade weapons. But the Zilani ships wouldn't distinguish between him and the dragons. In their xenophobic worldview, any human who associated with alien species was a traitor to be eliminated along with their non-human allies. The first energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking the ice around them with devastating force. The mother dragon responded instantly, breathing flames that intercepted the incoming fire and scattered it harmlessly. But Marcus knew they couldn't win a direct confrontation. The Zilani had orbital superiority and enough firepower to glass the entire continent. That's when the mother dragon did something extraordinary. Instead of fighting, she began to sing again. But this wasn't the healing song Marcus had heard in the chamber below. This was something primal and powerful, a call that reached out across the planet's surface and deep into its core. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the frozen landscape, ice began cracking and splitting as ancient passages opened. Steam and flame erupted from dozens of hidden chambers, and from each emerged the impossible, more dragons. Not the skeletal remains Marcus had seen in the bone field, but living creatures that had been waiting in hibernation for their matriarch's call. They came in all sizes and colors, some as massive as the mother dragon, others no larger than the hatchling. Their scales created a rainbow of light against the white snow as they took to the air, wings that had been folded for decades, spreading wide to catch the wind. The planet's dragon population hadn't been wiped out. They'd been sleeping, waiting for the threat to pass. The Zilani ships found themselves facing not one ancient dragon, but an entire flight of them. The creatures moved with tactical precision that spoke of intelligence and coordination far beyond simple animal behavior. They wove through the air in complex patterns, using their flame breath to create walls of superheated air that deflected energy weapons and confused targeting systems. Marcus watched in awe as the battle unfolded above him. The dragons weren't just fighting, they were demonstrating why they'd been such formidable allies to humanity during the original war. Their tactics were flawless, their coordination perfect. Each dragon seemed to know exactly where its companions were and what they intended to do next. But the Zelani weren't giving up easily. More ships descended from orbit and heavier weapons began firing down at the surface. The dragons responded by working together to create a phenomenon Marcus had only heard described in ancient battle reports: a firestorm. Their combined breath weapons merged into a spiraling column of flame that rose from the planet's surface, like a miniature star. The firestorm intercepted the orbital bombardment, creating a barrier of superheated plasma that no energy weapon could penetrate. But more than that, it was affecting the planet's weather systems. The massive thermal column was disrupting the storm patterns that had kept this world locked in perpetual winter. For the first time in 30 years, the clouds began to break. The hatchling beside Marcus began chirping excitedly, pointing with one small claw toward the sky. Through a gap in the clouds, Marcus saw something that made his heart race with hope. Human ships, a rescue fleet that must have been drawn by his emergency beacon. But they weren't just rescue vessels. The fleet included military escorts, ships capable of standing up to Zelani warships. The tide of battle was about to turn. But as Marcus watched the approaching human fleet, he realized this wasn't just a rescue operation. The arrival of active dragons would change everything about humanity's relationship with this world and its people. The war that had seemed to end 30 years ago was about to begin again. But this time, the balance of power had shifted. The mother dragon looked down at Marcus, her golden eyes reflecting the flames of battle above them. In that moment, he understood his role in what was to come. He wasn't just a rescued pilot anymore. He was a bridge between species, a translator who could help prevent the mistakes that had led to the First War. The real test of human-dragon cooperation was just beginning. 6 months after the Battle of the Ice Fields, Marcus stood in the observation deck of New Draconis Station, watching human and dragon construction crews work side by side to complete the massive orbital facility. The station represented everything the Alliance had accomplished and everything they still hoped to achieve, a symbol of cooperation between species that had once seemed impossible. The hatchling, now grown considerably and officially named Ember by the human colonists, perched beside him on a specially designed platform. The young dragon had become something of a celebrity throughout human space, its image appearing on everything from recruitment posters to children's educational programs. More importantly, it had become the primary translator between the two species, its natural intelligence enhanced by constant exposure to both human technology and dragon wisdom. The Zelani probe ships have been detected at the system's edge, Admiral Chen reported through the station's communication system. Long-range scans suggest they're testing our defenses again. Marcus nodded, unsurprised by the news. The Empire had been probing the system's defenses for months, sending small scout fleets to assess the strength of the human-dragon alliance. Each probe was turned back by the combined might of the Colonial Defense Force and the dragon flights, but they were becoming more frequent and more aggressive. "How many dragons are responding to the threat assessment?" Marcus asked. 47 adults and 12 juveniles, came the immediate response from the station's dragon liaison officer. The integration of the two species had progressed far beyond anyone's expectations, with dragons taking official positions in the colonial government and humans learning to communicate through the complex harmonic language their allies used. The real breakthrough had come when human scientists, working with dragon elders, discovered that the creature's seemingly magical abilities were actually sophisticated biological technologies. Dragonfire wasn't just combustion, it was controlled plasma generation. Their healing songs manipulated cellular frequencies in ways human medicine was only beginning to understand. Most remarkably, their ability to hibernate had preserved not just their bodies but their memories, creating living libraries of knowledge that spanned centuries. Ember chirped softly, a sound Marcus now understood meant concern. The young dragon had been monitoring the Empire's probe ships through frequencies humans couldn't detect, and its reports suggested something larger was coming. The Zelani weren't just testing defenses, they were gathering intelligence for a full-scale invasion. What does the Council say about evacuation procedures? Marcus asked, referring to the joint human-dragon governing body that had been established to coordinate their response to threats. The Dragon Elders refused to abandon this world again. Admiral Chen replied, "They've made it clear that they'll fight to the end rather than spend another 30 years in hibernation. The Human Colonial Council has voted to stand with them." Marcus understood the sentiment. This world had become more than just a colony or a dragon nesting ground. It had become a symbol of what the galaxy could be when different species chose cooperation over conquest. Abandoning it would mean abandoning the principles that made the alliance worth fighting for. The planet below had been transformed by the dragon's return. The perpetual ice storms had ended, replaced by a temperate climate that supported both human agriculture and dragon nesting sites. Cities were rising from the thawed ground, built with a unique architecture that accommodated both bipedal humans and massive dragons. Gardens of crystalline formations grown by dragonfire provided both beauty and practical energy storage. But the transformation went deeper than physical changes. Human technology had advanced dramatically through cooperation with dragon knowledge. Ships powered by controlled dragonfire could travel faster than any purely human vessel. Medical treatments based on dragon healing songs were curing diseases that had plagued humanity for generations. Even human psionics, long thought to be purely theoretical, had begun manifesting in individuals who spent extended time around dragons. The dragons, in turn, had benefited from human innovation. Their ancient knowledge was being preserved in human databases, ensuring that future generations would have access to wisdom accumulated over millennia. Human manufacturing techniques were helping dragons create tools and structures more efficiently than ever before. Most importantly, human mathematics and physics were helping dragons understand their own abilities in ways that allowed them to use their powers more effectively. Ember suddenly became agitated, its head swiveling toward deep space. Through the station's sensors, Marcus detected what had caught the dragon's attention, a massive displacement signature at the system's edge. The Empire wasn't sending another probe. They were sending everything they had. Admiral, we're detecting multiple capital ships entering the system, the sensor operator reported. Zelani battle groups, but they're not alone. I'm reading energy signatures from at least 6 different alien species. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Empire had done more than just gather intelligence. They'd assembled a coalition of species opposed to human expansion. The battle for this system would determine not just the fate of the Human-Dragon Alliance, but the future of galactic civilization itself. How long until they reach the planet? He asked. At current velocity? Approximately 18 hours, came the reply. 18 hours to prepare for a battle that would either establish the Human-Dragon Alliance as a major galactic power, or see both species driven to the edge of extinction. But as Marcus looked around the observation deck, watching human and dragon personnel working together with perfect coordination, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his crash on the ice. Hope. Ember nuzzled against his hand. The dragon's warm scales a reminder of everything they'd accomplished together. The young dragon looked up at him with those brilliant golden eyes and made a sound that needed no translation. It was ready to fight for this world, for this alliance, for the future they'd all worked to build. Marcus activated the station's general communication system, addressing both the human crew and the dragons perched throughout the facility. Attention all personnel. The Empire is coming with everything they have, but they're about to learn why humans and dragons chose to stand together. We're not just defending a world, we're defending the idea that different species can be stronger together than they ever could be apart. As if in response to his words, the mother dragon's voice carried across the communication frequencies, her ancient song joined by dozens of other dragon voices. The harmony was taken up by human voices as well, creating something new, a song of alliance that spoke of fire and stars, of courage and friendship, of a future worth fighting for. The Battle of New Draconis would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy learned that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It had always been their ability to make friends among the stars, and to stand by those friends no matter what darkness threatened to tear them apart. Marcus Chen, former mechanic and unlikely hero, stood ready to help defend that truth with his life.